previous episode, Joe is back on with us today. But instead of talking about terror strikes, we will be introducing you to how to write a book and get it published, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of you out there are having struggles when it comes to writing and actually getting a publisher or getting your books out there. But before we begin, please remember to check both our social media pages. Links will be in the description down below. Like, follow, subscribe, depending on whatever you're listening from on this podcast. And also check out our second podcast, which is Wicked Campfire Podcast. All links, once again, will be in the description down below. And also check out Joe's links. I'll link everything down below. Check out his books. Tell us what you think, by the way, about all his books. We like to hear from the feedback. But let's begin today's episode. And
Okay, yeah, before we get too deep, I want to say I'm glad it's still live. My last appearance didn't kill it. It isn't dead.
It's still moving on. It's still moving on. And he'll be with us on the second podcast for like 3 other episodes this month. Every single Friday, he'll be here with us. So when we are airing in Wicked Campfire Podcast, we'll be there. We'll be talking about UFOs. We'll be talking about paranormal stuff. We'll be talking about orbs. So if you like to see that side of Joe, you'll head on to the second podcast. And you'll get this new view of Joe. By the way, Joe, how are you?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good.
Are you ready for today?
Like I think I said the last episode, I've been saying for decades, I have my character say in Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You, remember, it could always be better, but it could often be worse.
So today we are tackling something that a lot of people in the literature world find nerve-wracking. Writing books. Writing books and actually figuring out how to get them published, either physically or even in the e-world of today. So, I don't know where we'll begin from. I think we should begin on how to write the book first before getting it published.
Yeah, let's not put the cart before the horse, right? Yeah. Does no good to talk about publishing if you've got nothing to publish. And also, I want to throw out there, even for those, don't tune out. If you're not interested in writing and publishing a book, don't tune out. This is also, for you, a behind-the-scenes book. It's not a tell-all. I don't, name a bunch of names or anything like that. But if you like reading, if you've ever thought, gee, what does an author go through? And all that behind the scenes stuff, how to write a book and get it published, hints, tips, and techniques, is also for you, to give you a peek behind, like the Wizard of Oz curtain, right? Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Well, this lets you rip the curtain and see Oz.
Okay, so we will begin with the writing process today. Joe, we are both authors. I'm a poetry author. You are a political thriller author. But for me, I'm dabbling into other genres as well. There'll be a book coming on. So I think we should begin with the writing process.
Yeah,
how do they figure it out?
Yeah, I have many copyrights. I only have 2 currently available international books. So yeah, I've written sci-fi, I've written poetry, I've written music, written and recorded music, but you can't see any of that. All that was just published locally, right? These you can see. And yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of authors out there. Whatever your genre, I don't care. I try to write how to write a book and get it published, hints, tips, and techniques, to be generic enough to apply to any genre, fiction or nonfiction even, but still give you some insight, some hints and tips and techniques Again, they have to talk somewhat generically because each person's situation is different. But
Mhm.
one thing is a certainty. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. There are just different ways and what may or may not work well for you, right? But
Mhm.
I like to say, I think it is the best hint, tip, or technique is uh, in my book. I'm grabbing my table of contents here.
Mhm.
Chapter 2, your story outline. All right,
Mhm.
that's where you want to start. Don't put the cart before the horse. You may have this chapter or the other chapter in mind, or your story outline is the best place to start. And I've had other authors, uh, when I've been doing interviews like this,
Mhm.
say, gee, I wish I would have read your book. or your book would have been available 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Because they said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to have that structure. Your story outline is the first document you open. You put what your working title is. Your title may change 50,000 times by the time it's published, but what is your working title? Like for this book, write and publish. Short and
Mhm.
sweet. All my file names then began write and publish. All right? So
Mhm.
write and publish, and then what is this book about? Just a short synopsis. Obviously, I'm writing a book to help others write and publish their book. And then list out any chapters that you feel, you've thought of up front that will go in your book. Any notes uh, on the concept of your book go in here. You may think of an important piece of dialogue or a quote. Put that in your outline so you don't forget it. Put all these things in your outline. And then your outline may change over the next month, year, 2 years, 10 years, however long it takes to
Mhm.
finish your book. Uh, but that's kind of the place to organize your thoughts so that you have a structure and you don't lose your place. Or when you're working on uh, chapter 1, you don't lose the idea you have for chapter 5. Like chapter
Mhm.
5 might then become chapter 3 or chapter 9, whatever. Those can move around. But in your story outline, then you have those ideas and you can more easily move them around there so that then when it comes time to write those things, you haven't lost those concepts, those ideas, those thoughts.
Mhm. And you're talking of it as an outline or a structure. For me, on my end, I normally like to call them skeleton versions. So when I have like a book idea, I have my draft, but in a second file, I have a skeleton version of it. So I have my ideal title. If I want to include a subtitle, I put it there. If I have locations, I key in my locations. And if the story wants to change, I'll have to put in points in there. As I'm writing, I go back to the skeleton version. I'm like, in chapter 1, this happened, but I'm not quite sure if that will go on. And then I'm like, in chapter 2, this happened, but I want it to go in this other direction. And then you'll find, even when it comes to my characters, I like the same way you put it in the movies, in order of appearance. That's how I put it in my skeleton version. So I
Yes.
don't lose track. Because I remember the first book I ever started writing, when I began knowing that I have my own creative process, I was like 15. And I wrote this book, and it was perfect to me. It was my first draft. I had 20 chapters in, and then I had somebody review it, and then they're like, okay, good. Now review it again yourself as the author. Come back to me the second chapter with the second draft. When I did that, Joe, can you believe me that those chapters all went down to 5? They went down to 5 because back then I didn't know that I had to structure out the story. So as I was rereading the chapters, I realized my other chapters, though, they were either repeating or the story did not make sense, or even the character suddenly disappeared a new one spawned out of nowhere. It's like the story just took its own reins and just went to a direction I didn't want it to go. And it ended up making no sense. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that we authors can't keep up. We can't keep up with the story. So if you don't have somewhere the structure is written down, I myself can't even tell you what will happen in chapter 1 when I'm already in chapter 20 if I don't have it written down somewhere. I can't.
Exactly. No, you are making my point perfectly. Exactly right. Whether you call it the skeleton file or the story outline file, you need one of those to keep you on track so that, yeah, as you're putting things in your chapter, which again, chapters come later, you want a good solid story outline to say, this is how I plan on beginning, this is what I plan to have in the middle, this is what I plan to be my ending. Again, that can change over time. And if you change direction, you go back to your story outline, create a new version, copy it, and then make changes. So keep old copies of how you had it in case you decide to go back, right? But then if you change it, you're keeping yourself on track. And like you said, you don't have to remember every word of every chapter. It's just not possible. You're just not going to do that. And then, like you said, to avoid duplications, unless if a duplication is needed. Now, I like to say, like in Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You, there are a couple key points that are indeed replicated at different parts of the book. But the thing to think here is you don't know 100% your audience. You don't know if they're an avid reader who's going to sit down and read it. They're quick and can read your book in 10 hours, or if they're someone who's going to read it over 10 days, or if they're the kind of person who may take 3 months. So by the time they're in if they read it through, then they're obviously getting it all. So you don't want to repeat. But you have to cover and plan for those people who read over an extended period of time, and that may be in chapter 5, that relates to something also said in chapter 1, you need to tie together. There may need to be some repetitiveness there. So you want to create those links without repeating too much. It's a delicate balance.
And speaking of potential readers, for new authors, I know there is something that gives them pressure, is the fact that, do I have a big enough platform for my book, or will my book reach a big enough audience in the future, or maybe will I even get somebody who will enjoy my book? And I think that comes to the fact that books today, they evolve around 5 genres, although there are a lot of genres when it comes to writing. You'll find a lot of people either do poetry, some will do pure fiction, some will do a creative nonfiction, but you'll find very rarely that people are fusing 2 different genres. Like, let's say for you, Terror Strikes, you mentioned that it's a fact fiction, like you call it.
I call it faction, yeah.
Yeah, it's
faction,
part fact,
yeah.
part fiction. For me, my book that's coming up, it's magical realism. So you're fusing in the magical world with actually the real life world. And you'll find that people find it hard to tackle new genres because they're like, oh, audiences today, they enjoy fairy tales. Audiences today, they enjoy pure fiction. Audiences today enjoy comics. And I think that's the problem with authors coming in today. You try to tackle a genre that you're not quite familiar with, and you end up with a very shitty book, by the way. And you'll find that the book that could have been great is a genre that you yourself can introduce. Just like music, you can introduce a brand new genre. It doesn't have an audience, but I'm pretty sure you'll get 2, 3 readers out of 10 who will enjoy your book. And I think that's a fear. I think it's just a
Yeah.
fear for others.
Well, there is a market for anything. I mean, how many billions of people on the planet are there right now? Like 8 billion? So there is an audience for basically almost anything. The question is, and important to know, in how to write a book and get it published, hints, tips, and techniques. I make sure I go through that, unlike other books, because when I first thought about doing this, I went online, and there's a million books. How to publish your book on Amazon. Well, that's not what people are asking for or about. I wrote a book trying not to be too big and too long so it wouldn't be too expensive. You're right. From the creative concept to writing to publishing options. Of course, I don't go into all of them. I just give you an idea of what you're looking for, and you have to find your fit. Then once you're done publishing, you're not done, because in order to sell the books, it's very few that people just accidentally stumble on and buy. You have to promote your book, like the last episode, right? What was I doing? Promoting Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You. You, anyone else has to try to introduce their book and their concept and what's going on to people so that they are aware that it's there, because there are so many new books that come out on a weekly basis, especially nowadays with self-publishing available, or as I like to say, there's self-publishing and then there's assisted publishing, I call it. I went with the higher end assisted publishing. Illumify Media and Terror Strikes is on McHenry Press, which is a subsidiary because it's a political thriller. So they wanted a line that just dealt with, kind of separated from the other kind of books, to keep politics out of their other line and make this one just for politics, because they have another author also that writes political oriented books. So McHenry Press was created, and McHenry, you should recognize the name, is for Fort McHenry, off the coast of which Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. So it's meant to be patriotic, political kind of books. So, and I went with them. You can do cheaper. It all depends on you and what's good for you, what you're comfortable with, and, what works for you. If you're willing to put in more work, more time, and less money, there's that route, self-publishing. If you want more help making it look as professional as possible, like a HarperCollins book, Illumify has former HarperCollins employees, so they've been with the big publisher. So, and a lot of these publishing firms have somebody that's worked at another publisher, but for how long is the question. So again, everything all depends on your situation. I tried to present as many options as possible so that you determine what's right for you.
And there is this thing that I've heard a lot of people commenting, that the question actually is normally, what if I'm not a writer? Or what if I'm not a true writer? Because when you say that, when people say author or I'm a writer of books, people think of things like James Patterson or Stephen Fry or even J.K. Rowling's, household names that people know of. But for small authors, you're like, oh, you just wrote a story and then you published it. But people don't realize that once you begin writing, once you begin that first draft, once you begin your first sentence, from there on, you're a writer.
Yeah. And
It's just coming
remember,
from in you
yeah,
onto paper.
and I say this, and before I forget, let me pass this along. Uh, a link, tinyurl.com/write and publish supplement.
Hmm.
You can get some free stuff that isn't in the book on that page, on that article. It has the, outline of the book, about the author, and then of course, like I say, some additional free stuff you can see in advance of buying the book, or after you buy the book, then, additional information online. Uh, you know, so the article's meant to be a supplement to the book and at the same time kind of a promotion for the book, right? Because everything is, to some degree, is online today. And so you want to do those things. And then I've lost my train of thought now. Oh, because you were saying, writing. All
Hmm.
right. Terror strikes coming soon to a city near you. You mentioned a few names. There's a service that compares books. And I use that service, and they say that if you like Dean Koontz, the writing in Terror Strikes is like Dean Koontz. So if you
Hmm.
like Dean Koontz, supposedly you should like my writing. And the same thing, you've read books, you're not stealing somebody's style, but
Hmm.
you generally then pay homage to a certain degree. You know somebody, you like their writing, you're invariably going to accidentally, if not on purpose, borrow their method of doing things,
Hmm.
set and structure and that. And the other thing is also, remember too, you want to have a book buddy or several people, like you said, to share it with. Share your outline and get input. You don't have to take everybody's advice, but just get input. And they may have a good idea that you want to adopt in your book. And then as you're writing it, share chapters, get their feedback, see what they say. Maybe you want to, maybe you don't want to, then change things. And then, of course, ultimately, you're going to have an editor that's going to go through and help you with your book. So you
Hmm.
don't have to be the best writer on the planet. Like, how to write a book and get it published itself is conversational English. That is not how traditional English writing would title that book. But I did that on purpose to make this very point. You can write in conversational English. I mean, literally, laptops now, you can have a piece of software with a headset that allow you to dictate right into your computer, and
Hmm.
you can speak your book to life and then go through and clean it up some. And then, of course, Microsoft Word has its own spell check and grammar check. And you can also use Grammarly to
Hmm.
also help with grammar. And then again, ultimately, then your editor, you will go back and forth with to help perfect it, to make it more traditional written form English.
Yeah, and when you talked about the softwares, I just remembered before it slips my mind, there was a website I stumbled upon during COVID, during the lockdown. I don't even remember what the website was. It was like God's grace that I stumbled upon it, but it generates ideas for you if you're stuck with anything. If you're stuck with a music piece, if you're stuck with books, if you're stuck with scripts, you just key in whatever keywords you want. Let's say you just say fantasy, Scotland, two lovers, and then it gives you a synopsis which you can work on. So it just gives you a random synopsis, even if it's one paragraph, and then you can work on that synopsis to build a story for your own. Because sometimes you don't have stories, by the way. You want to write, but your outline does not make sense. And sometimes you write and then you realize, oh my God, somebody else beat me to it. They've already published a similar story. Because I've had situations like that. The current book I'm writing, I have my first half done, and I know how my last half will end. But the middle part, I'm trying to figure out how to make it work, because every single time I watch a movie, because it's a detective story, every single time I watch a movie, every single time I read a book, I realize somebody else has already done a similar piece. And
Now, that's
to me, it's like
important.
something new. In my
Yeah.
brain, I'm like, this is a brilliant idea. Nobody has thought of it. This would be the perfect crime in paper. And then when I write it down and then watch a movie, I'm like, oh my God, somebody else thought of the same thing.
Now,
And
that's an important thing there. Now, you can copyright specific words. You can't copyright a concept. You can trademark words, right, but not a concept. Now, like you're saying, you can write something similar, but of course, you have to make sure you're not copying. You can't be identical. Now, like I mentioned in How to Write a Book and Get It Published, hints, tips, and techniques. The movie Stargate, all right? Roland Emmerich, one of my favorite directors. He's got many blockbuster films. Now, they came up with that concept, Stargate, based on the concept of the old ancient aliens. You can see that on the History Channel, the Learning Channel, all that, those shows. That in the past, the pyramids were really landing pads for spacecraft. All right? Now, the idea and concept of wormhole travel is a generic theory. You can use that theory. You can't use the same specifics that they use in that Stargate, though. And you can use the concept of, pyramid ships or what, but you can't use the identical concept of pyramid ships landing on the pyramids in ancient Egypt. That would be potentially too close of a similar concept. So you can deal with similarities. You just have to be careful to put in as much originality as you can. And you mentioned that concept creator. There's a new thing everybody's been talking about lately. Elon Musk originally helped create a company called OpenAI, and they have a thing called ChatGPT, and it's the same thing. People are using that to put in, tell me a story about this, at that, and the other thing, and it's artificial intelligence that will spew something out. Like you said, then that can help you, give you an idea, but you can't just cut and paste what it tells you into yours. You can use it as an idea generator, but you can't copy.
You can use it as an inspiration, let's say it as such.
Yes. Yeah, that's the right word.
Yeah, because when it comes to originality, I remember the first guest on this show, the first ever guest I had on Care Life podcast 2 years ago. His name is called Chris Blay. He's from the UK, from Essex, and he has a book that right now ranks as one of my favorites. Is like a fusion between Stephen Fry and Stephen King and J.K. Rowling's and every wonderful mystery fictional that you can find out there, and it's called A Necessary End, The Curse of Courtney. And that book was so original. The story was so new to me, and the concept was, and it's just a 300-page book, by the way. The concept was so new that I was like, this is something that others don't do. Finding originality, finding a story that stands out, that your concept, each and every chapter, each and every line hasn't been heard. It hasn't been heard before. It seems familiar to some people. Yes, it has maybe happened to them in real life, maybe a situation, maybe a real life story. But when it comes to fictional writing, no. He literally hacked the system and found a brand new concept that nobody else has. It's like yours, a political thriller that's faction. I think it will take a couple of years before people hop on that train of writing actual faction, incorporating fact with fiction, because we are merely embracing magical realism, and you bringing up a new concept of faction is, ooh, I don't even know a way to explain it because it's so new to people. It's so broad. But before we continue, I think there's something we should mention, and I don't know if you can comment on this. Experimentation. It's something that I've always wanted to do as an author, where we just join forces with different authors and then we come up with one book together. It's like a short story, but in one book. So each and every author comes with their own single short story, or maybe three, and then we can just compile it in a book that fits one specific genre. Let's say we can write children's stories, and then we have like 5 authors in one book.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I kind of say that in the book, not the collaboration like you're talking about, which is great. And there are authors, you can find books out there that have 3 names on it, and they're doing what you're doing. I kind of give that as a hint in the book. If you don't think you have a novel in you, well, 3 short stories that have any remote tie to one another can then be put together as one book, because one book generally has sub-threads, and it's not all exactly one thing. Or also, you can write a novelette. You mentioned the book 300 pages. Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You is 286, and the story itself is only 250. Now, and because I wanted to put, indeed, several sub-themes. I didn't want to harp on and dwell on one thing completely through the whole book, even though obviously terrorism is the theme that ties all those sub-themes together. Like, there is a very important sub-theme on suicide prevention in the book. So, that ties with the war on terror and soldiers coming back with PTSD. So there's a lot of different things going on in that book, and the terrorism flows it all together. So yeah, you can bring together 3 different characters from 3 different short stories and bring them together if you find a commonality that then allows you to tie them. Oh, and I wanted to say, I mentioned the pages of my book. Another thing, too, was I could have very easily, there's stuff I left out. I could have written additional chapters on cyber terrorism, because I'm a former IT guy. I didn't go into that. I could have gone more into, I could have written 3 chapters alone on mass shootings, right? But the times we're in, with inflation the way it is, I wanted to keep my page count down to keep the book cost down, right? I even joke in the book, because Martin is my character, who's a Detroit newspaper man who decides to write a book on terrorism. So it's a book within a book. We follow him on his journey to write a book on terrorism. And then all those other things are interwoven in there. So, and kind of losing my train of thought here. But so I wanted to keep, keep the page size down so people could afford it. But all right, now, if you have a story, a novelette, 100 pages can be just fine. All right? 300 pages, 500 pages, whatever it takes to get the elements and tell the story well enough to get across the moral of the story, as they would say, right? The points of the story you want to, whether that's in 100 pages, 250, or 750, although don't expect too many people to buy that big a book. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
reads War and Peace size books anymore. We just don't have the attention span for it.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of the size of the book, I think there is also one thing that people are trying hard to figure out. What kind of story am I going to write? Will it be a single book type of story? Will the story have a sequel? Like, I remember asking you in the previous episodes, are you thinking of having Terror Strikes 2, like the sequel to the first one?
Right.
Or do people want to write trilogies or maybe a saga of some sort where you'll have like 5, 7 different books? I think that also comes to a challenge because for me, the book that I'm mentioning, the crime book that I'm writing right now, it's a crime mystery book, and I really want it to be a trilogy. So I had to plan out everything so perfectly from the pages that I wanted so that the book does not exceed its limitations, because I wanted the story in the first book to carry on into the second book and the second book to carry on into the third book. It's like a continuation.
It
Where if
has,
you read the third book, you have to go
yeah,
back to the first book and understand everything that's
it
going on.
has to be complete enough story so that people don't go away thinking, well, this person's just suckering me into buying a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've got to get a complete enough book that if indeed they only read that book, they're fulfilled and you haven't ripped them off.
Mm-hmm.
and, but at the same time, enough of a hook to then hopefully interest them in additional books. I mean, when J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, I'm sure, you know, that first book, it can be read and you walk away, okay, that was great. But then when book 2 and book 3 come out, they're also an extension of the
Mm-hmm.
first book and the theme, but yet also, again, their own contained complete enough story also. So yeah, you can have the continuing thread, but each one needs to be succinct enough to fulfill a reader. And yeah, I left it to where there could be a sequel to Terror
Mm-hmm.
Strikes, but I have not planned for it to be a continuing series. Unlike, uh, 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 yeah, Tom Clancy, yeah, is it Clancy? Yeah, Tom Clancy. Who's
Mm-hmm.
Jack Ryan? Tom Clancy and pretty much the Jack Ryan series. Each book is a self-contained book, but the series then has the same character across it, and then some additional aspects you may not have known about him from the previous one, or things that change in his life
Mm-hmm.
between to keep it so that a series goes, because I indeed love Clancy. I prefer the movies to the books myself, but
Mm-hmm.
like Terror Strikes in part has been compared to Some of All Fears from Clancy, because there's that a point of nuclear threat. So again, it all depends on you. And if you were hoping to go through a traditional publisher, in
Mm-hmm.
order to have any chance of getting a traditional publisher, because they've got a full stable already of horses, so to speak, that they know are studs, are going to sell them a bunch of books. So you as an unknown really got to knock their socks off. And the pretty much only way to do that is
Mm-hmm.
indeed have a trilogy worked out. You're going to need to have your first 2 books done and then your third one outlined and send that all and hope somebody will take a chance on you. But traditional publishing is not going to work for 99.999 ad infinitum percent of all budding authors. Because again, they've got proven horses in the barn. They're not, they're hoping to find the occasional odd, the next Stephen King or the next Clancy, Patterson, Kuntz, J.K. Rowling. But they're not betting on that.
And I think I should just throw into the pot for anybody who's listening right now. For anybody looking for inspirations when it comes to these big books like sequels or trilogies or maybe sagas, I think they should check out old household names that there maybe not be much pressure on. Let's say Arthur Conan Doyle. He wrote all the the Sherlock Holmes book. He's the one who introduced crime today. He's the one who introduced investigations today. So for anybody who's writing maybe a murder mystery or maybe a crime book, you can check him out. See how he writes his stories, because I find the writing process that old man had very, very inspirational, because you'll realize that his books, he has 60 books in total when it comes to the Sherlock Holmes saga. And you'll find that you'll read book 1. The next time you'll find a relation in book 1 is maybe in book 20. That's when they'll mention the story in book 1 again. And then you're in story number 60, and then you realize story number 5 has been referenced in story number 1. And that mix match of reference and also the subtleness of relation when it comes to the books, I find it so captivating because it's not obvious.
Yeah.
It's not obvious. Most sagas today or most trilogies, you'll find out that book 1, where it ended is where it picked up, and then they are bringing so much flashback that now the second book is not interesting, and then the third book is supposed to close up everything, but now they are bringing you back again to the first story, not introducing a new one with a relation to the first one. No, they're bringing you back to where you began, and now you have 3 books. 1 was the only one interesting. 2 and 3 were very much unnecessary.
And that's where I go back to, the ripoff, right? Each book has to be interesting enough on its own. And also think Ian Fleming, when he dreamt up James Bond, he never dreamt that there would be so many books and then obviously spawn this great movie franchise that has been going. He sat down with an intent to write a good, interesting book, and it blew up, and he was able to make a career out of it. But remember, all of those names you and I have mentioned were all unknown at some point. So when I say a traditional publishing house is probably not going to pay any attention to you, do not let that intimidate you or scare you away. And I try to make that point in how to write a book and get it published, hints, tips, and techniques. Go for it. That's why I wrote my book, to help you go for it. Go for it. Self-publish. Once you get that first book out, then whether it's a trilogy or not, you could then be writing a completely other book in a completely different genre. But once you've established one book, then you have a better chance of getting the attention of the publishers.
Yeah, and when it comes to the publisher, you have mentioned now self-publishing. This is a new concept to most. You'll find some people are wondering, oh my God, how do I get my book on Amazon? Or how do I get my own ebook? And you realize that a lot of people know when it comes to publishing, I have to find an editor, I have to find an agent, I have to find a publishing house. The concept of actual self-publishing is still new, even in this year, even in 2023. A lot of people discovered it between 2020 and 2022 because that's when ebooks were popping up. I realized Amazon had a lot of books popping up during the COVID period, and right now people are now learning slowly by slowly how to self-publish, and they're not spending a dime. By the way, you're earning money, but you hadn't spent a dime getting that book out there? You're spending money, let's say, marketing it, but you reduce your cost when it comes to the publishing part.
Well, it all depends. Again, now, if you're looking for no cost, you can go through like ebook launch. But no cost means a whole lot of added concerns on you. You have to have it all perfect. You have to buy the software to do all the things and get it in the right form. They help you, but you do it all, as opposed to a self-publishing, which helps you some. And yeah, you're gonna pay for an editor. There's no ifs, no ands, no buts. You've gotta have an outside professional editor, uh, to help if you want a serious book. So there's gonna be some costs of some kind. It depends on the route you go as to how much those costs are, as opposed to like assisted publishing, who then, is of course then a greater cost, but then a lot less pressure on you because you're paying them to do things for you.
Mm-hmm. And also in the point of self-publishing, I think that Barnes and Noble has a press of their own where people can do the same thing that you do on KDP. I found that out like a couple of weeks ago, but it's only limited to those in the United States. So anybody else outside cannot access the press of Barnes and Noble, and then you'll find that it's only local. So you realize that your book is in your local Barnes and Noble. You'll
Yeah.
have it, let's say, in your Los Angeles County. That's where, if there's a Barnes and Noble, that's where the book will be available. But when you're in Kentucky, you won't find it. You'll have to fly out, go to LA, get the book, go back to Kentucky, by the way. But
Well, now, yeah, that's like why I went with Illumify and McHenry. They get your book onto Ingram Sparks. Ingram Sparks is kind of the biggest actual printer in the world of books. So, and they then get your book. You get an ISBN to make sure any bookstore anywhere on the planet can get your book. And yeah, Barnes and Noble also has the Nook, which is their version of Kindle. Apple Books has that. Apple Books, their version of Kindle. So now you could put on Amazon, but that's a proprietary form. To get on Nook or Apple, there's a thing in the book, and I'm not going to give away the name because obviously I want you to buy the book to get all the hints, tips, and techniques, right? But in my book, I tell you how that once you have a book in EPUB form to go up onto Kindle, converted to Kindle, you can then submit that somewhere else that then automatically, for free, gets your book onto Nook and Apple Books. So you don't have to do all those things. There are, I went through this learning curve, so you don't have to.
Mm-hmm. And I think we should actually put in the process of finding a publisher, because you mentioned you're already published. It's not just self-publishing on Amazon. You actually have your book, Terror Strikes, published. So how do people get to the point where you find a publisher, or what are the ways that you can go to? Do you email people, or are you making phone calls? Because I myself don't even know that. I don't even know where I can find a publisher right now.
Well, obviously, in the days of the internet, you can Google publishing, and of course, you'll get a bazillion different results.
Mm-hmm.
And my book is meant to give you a leg up in the direction of your options. But at the end of the day, you will then, of course, want to, uh, well, you may or may not. I mean, you may want to just go ahead. Hey, okay, I gave you that advice in there. I've published with these people. Obviously, I trust them. You've got the book in your hand from that place. You may just want to go with them. Or, again, you can then do more research and find somebody else you feel is a better fit for whatever the reason. Maybe looking for a lower cost or whatnot. Because, again, I went with what I call assisted publishing because I wanted those former HarperCollins professionals to, give me advice like I'm giving you advice.
Mhm.
And they'd been in the publishing industry for 20 plus years.
And what advice can you give them in terms of how to make a profit when it comes to your book? Because you'll find a lot of authors, even if they're getting published, they end up getting ripped off in the end. And you realize they're getting small percentages with these publishing houses. And sometimes when you're self-publishing, you end up having very low-cost books that you realize, oh my God, I'm not making a profit in this book. So how do you make a profit with your writing?
Well, you can never tell. I mean, you can talk to people and people could say they love the concept, but whether it sells at the end of the day or not is always going to be a gamble. I mean, there is no sure thing. Harry Potter was not a sure thing. It went viral. We all hope that our concept goes viral, but you just don't know. There is a market for anything and everything. You have to promote to sell and then indeed hope, as it's like the old Pantene commercial. If you remember that, the hair care company, they tell two friends and they tell two friends, pretty soon exponentially you're talking millions of people buzzing about a product. Well, you need that for your book in order to really actually make money. And you don't know. You can't know with any certainty in advance. But again, please don't let that scare you or make you shy away. If this is something you want to do, publish a book, knowing it may or may not sell. Don't let people tell you, oh, well, this is going to definitely sell 10,000, 100,000 books. No one knows with any certainty if something will sell or not at the end of the day. Do it because you've got a story to share, and hopefully then it gets shared to a few people who then also love it, who share it with other people like the Pantene commercial, and over time it grows.
And Joe, as we come to a close on this specific episode, what advice would you give any upcoming author or somebody who wants to get their book published? What advice would you give them on how to start or how to get to the end where they have a physical book that they can present to people?
Again, everybody's process is going to be different. So obviously, I gotta say, buy my book to help you write and publish and promote your book. Because this book came out of interviews. In fact, that's a tip and technique in the book. Anyone who has a podcast like you has an easy book. You can take your favorite episodes, have them transcribed, and those are chapters. Then you just clean them up. You add things that, weren't said in those episodes that you think kind of needed to be said as a follow-up, and you've got a book. So, Now I've lost my train of thought again when I went down that road. But yeah, this book came out of interviews with other people. The impetus and inspiration came from that, and anyone's inspiration might come from anything. My stories generally come to me in a dream. I don't know where, inspiration come from anywhere, anytime. Have a pad of paper or use your smartphone and dictate yourself an email whenever an inspiration hits you. Get it down in some way, shape, or form while it's fresh. And like I keep saying, if you're inspired and you think this story is important to share, others are likely to think so. Though you don't know if it'll sell 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 books, go for it. Definitely go for it. For your own personal well-being, your own personal sense of accomplishment, if nothing else.
So basically, just have faith in yourself, write, push it out there, and let your story tell the world what you're thinking.
Now, and some people may have nonfiction. You might have some sort of story to tell, even if you change names, that might help another person, like with illness or depression, right? Like we mentioned, Terror Strikes has a suicide prevention sub-thread to try to help others who are feeling issues and concerns about self-harm, suicidal thoughts. If you've got something to share, you can put it in fiction or you can put it in nonfiction, or in my case, faction, combining the two, and hope that others will appreciate your work. But if nothing else, again, you've got that personal sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything we can add here that won't stretch this episode so long, but I think the key things have been said, and the majority that haven't been said have been covered in your book. So the best the best route that anybody listening or anybody out there can take is just to grab a copy of How to Write a Book and Get Published by Joseph M. Lenard. Links within the description. You can read the book. If you have any questions, you can just hit him up on Facebook or even Twitter or even Instagram, or maybe even an email. Who knows? You can just shoot your questions to him. I'm pretty sure he'll be willing to answer any questions you might have, or give an advice maybe, or even help you out in your creative process if you're stuck. Because we all need help in one way or another, right?
Well, and I again, like with Terror Strikes, I tried to keep the size down, to keep the cost down. How to write a book and get it published, hints, tips, and techniques. I wanted to cover as much as I could, but at the same time, obviously not balloon the size of that book to something either. I wanted to create a one-stop book, as opposed to, you could buy a book on writing, you could buy a book on publishing, you could buy a book on promotion. I wanted one book to cover it all at a reasonable price. You can get the ebook for $5. You can get the physical book on Amazon for just $10, rather than spending $5 on 5 different books.
Yeah, and that's a great thing.
For a total of 25, right? So again, I wanted to keep that cost down. $10 is pretty cheap for the amount of advice that I've tried to pack in this book.
Yeah, and everybody listening, you can find the links in the description once again for both books, for How to Write Your Book and also for the novel itself, Terror Strikes. Read, You can comment on social media. You can leave your review on whichever you love best. You can tell Joe which parts inspired you the most when it comes to both books. And also you can check out my poetry collections, Life Shackles, also on Amazon. Links will be in the description down below. You can also follow all our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, literally anywhere. We both are. You can follow us there. You can check out his podcast, which he co-hosts. It's also on YouTube. I'll link it all in the description down below. But Joe, we thank you so much for being part of the Care Life family and sharing your thoughts on how to write a book and get it published.
Oh, thank you again for having me. And also let me throw out one more time, even if you're not interested in writing and publishing, if you're an avid reader or you know an avid reader, if, I'm hoping you'll buy a copy of Terror Strikes to give them as a gift, obviously, but maybe that's not their thing. You don't think that's their thing. Even if they're not looking to write, how to write a book and get it published gives them behind the scenes a bit of insight that a lot of things they never thought went into the books they read.
Yeah, and as we come to a close, before we end, everybody, you can join me and Joe on the second podcast on March, all the Fridays of March. Those are 4 different episodes on March, where we'll be talking about different interesting things in a different world, not necessarily about writing. We'll be talking about UFOs, his experiences with paranormal activity, and we'll also be having a lot of guests there. But for Care Alive, I think this month and maybe next month, this will be the last time you're seeing John Care Alive. Maybe in the coming months, you'll see him back here again with a different story to tell, or maybe a different book by then. Who knows? Who knows? But for now, this will be it from the both of us. I've been your host, Phyllis Mackenzie. My guest today has been Joseph M. Lenard. Not Joseph Lenard, Joseph M. Lenard.
Yes, thank you. Right. There's another Joseph Lenard. So, yeah, you got to remember Joseph M. Lenard. And, yeah, it's Lenard. It's not Lenard. It looks like Lenard, but it's not French. It's Lenard, but without an O.
Yeah, actually, your last name reminds me of a show. I don't know if you've watched it. It's called Green Mill, where we have a character whose name is John Coffey, and he normally says that my name is John Coffey. Yes, coffee like the drink, but spelled different. It's a very nice show, by the way. Whoever wants to watch it, it's sad, but it's a very nice show inspired by the book by Stephen King. Once again, we'll be talking about Stephen King in this episode a lot. So anybody who wants to check out that show, you can check it out so that you never forget Leonard's name. Once you hear the name Coffee, you'll also remember Lenard. Because remember, there'll be a man on Care Life podcast who once said that his name is Lenard, looks like Lenard, but pronounced as Lenard.
And Joseph, not Joe like cup of Joe, Joseph.
Nah, like Joseph. Like Joe for Joseph.
Speaking of coffee, not like a cup of Joe, right?
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Join us next episode where we'll interview a new author whose books are being turned into a VR game. I know that will be a very interesting topic to talk about, but for now, this will be goodbye from me and Joe. Love you all.